Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Turning Privacy Data into a Visual Marketing Advantage. My name is Richard Holder, and I'm the head of marketing at Forethought Marketing, and I'll be your host today. Before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items. Today's session is being recorded. A link to the replay will be available tomorrow. You'll receive an email with a link to that so that you can watch it later or share it with others. During today's presentation, we invite you to ask as many questions as you'd like. Please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen. That allows us to manage those. Some questions we may answer live on the webinar, and others we may answer in the Q&A box itself. So please take advantage of that. Joining me today is Mark Lavelle, CEO of Forethought Marketing. Mark has over 25 years of experience in Silicon Valley, including creation of 2 Silicon Valley startups, along with other marketing, sales, and executive positions at a variety of software companies. He's an excellent leader and a visionary in the area of privacy. He's been working with some of our Fortune 1000 customers for many years to understand and implement privacy solutions for them. Let me turn the time over to Mark and let him take it from there.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate that introduction. All right, so I'm excited to be here, everybody. I'd like to give you just a quick update or perspective on a little bit about Forethought Marketing's privacy compliance history. We have been in the arena of privacy compliance for a number of years. We started off in marketing automation during the early part of 2016. A lot of our customers came to us and say, hey, is there anything you can do from a GDPR perspective? We created some custom solutions initially, and then we realized that the product was needed. So we came up with our first For-Comply product release in 2018. That particular one was centered and focused around Oracle. We added application independence in 2020. That included Marketo and other platforms. And in 2021, we released a privacy as a platform version, which allows us to have an underlying infrastructure that is modifiable and changeable. Then in 2022, we added a new UI, easier configuration and setup. And for 2023, we've been working on this webinar all year. So excited to be with you, and thank you very much. Today's subject, I'm sorry, I missed a slide here. Today's subject is stop wasting privacy data. And what we understand or what we see with a lot of our customers is that they collect a lot of privacy data, but they fail to understand that this is valuable marketing data. And so we want to dig in a little bit today on how you can take your privacy data and turn it into a visual marketing advantage. I want to back up just a quick second here and talk about why capturing marketing consent, just to start with, just as a baseline, is essential. Now, I think everybody probably on this call knows there's legal reasons, there's GDPR, there's CASL, there's dozens of them, why capturing marketing consent is needed. But there's also marketing reasons, internal reasons within your organization, and I think the most important category is that there are trust reasons. If your customers understand that you are collecting consent, honoring that consent, that will build trust with them and you. And to do that, you have to be able to use that marketing information in a way that the customer expects you to, in a way that the customer wants you to. And so capturing marketing consent is, of course, the first step or stage in that. So today I want to talk a little bit about this person. And this is a person who in the organization is generally charged with privacy compliance. And this person has a lot of internal constituents to deal with. The marketing and sales department, the legal department, the IT department, all of these different departments at your organization. And they have a lot of different types of information that they need to provide and work with for those departments. All of this information that is being gathered for each of these departments is information that your company can leverage and use. Largest and most important of these is down here in the lower left-hand corner, consent and permission, but also how the law is interpreted and documented. You want to be able to catch and potentially use that information. Legal department, and potentially from a marketing perspective to your customers, prove that you're using this information in a way that delivers what the customer wants and builds trust with them. be able to understand what's going on from a geographical perspective. All of these different areas or areas where you're collecting data that you potentially may have the capability to leverage. Now, this data, more importantly than internally, is gathered externally. You gather data from a privacy perspective from your customers, obviously your prospects, and even your visitors and suspects. And if you look at everybody that your company connects with, excluding perhaps vendors, all of them really fall under this heading. You need to, you are and will collecting privacy data for all of these constituents. The question is this data being used? Is it being leveraged? The thing is we've all heard the phrase, every cloud has a silver lining. Well, privacy, many marketers look at as a cloud. And perhaps there's some truth to that. You have to comply with the law. You have to do certain things that perhaps slow you down from a marketing perspective. But at the same time, that data that you do gather can be leveraged, sort of flipping this and turning privacy compliance into a marketing capability, a marketing advantage. Now, I want to show you an underlying structure, or what I'm going to call a marketing structure of ForComply for a second. And it's going to, there's a lot on this page, and I don't really want you to sort of absorb this whole page, because today I want to kind of drill down into just the bottom part of it, just these bottom 3 tables, because this is where the marketing information that you potentially can more highly leverage sort of exists. And it's far more than 3 tables. These are sort of 3 categories of table, or 3 areas of tables. And to talk more about this type of data, I'm going to be switching today between 3 different systems. One of them is PowerPoint, which you see on screen here. The other is ForComply, the actual privacy compliance system. And the last is ForSegments, which is the segmentation and reporting tool that runs on top of ForComply that allows you to do that leveraging that we're going to talk about today. So with that said, I'm going to switch now over to ForComply and kind of show you what the system looks like, show you the different areas of the screen. This is not going to be a demonstration today. We're not going to show you all the features and functions and capabilities of this. But what I do want to talk about is how there is an area, I'm trying to draw on the screen, but this is in PowerPoint, I have to point with the mouse, how there is an area for privacy compliance inputs and how that information is gathered, how citizen rights are gathered, information about rights that people are executing or having delivered to them, how there's a legal activities vault, and some other areas regarding configuration, which I'll come down to. Now, all of these areas that ForComply works with are also represented in ForSegments. This is the 3rd system that I'm going to kind of show you today. And again, in ForSegments, and we'll come back to this in just a minute, we can see we have citizen permissions. This is all of the permissions that we need to collect, how long they have to live, being able to collect and maintain and track that time to live, have those permissions expire when legally required to do so, or when the customer wants you to do so, and being able to use that information is what we're going to come back and see here in ForComply. Also, we have rights information, legal activity information, even compliance input information. That's where the information originally came from. All of that information is available in ForComply and segmentable from a ForSegments perspective. So going back now for a second to the PowerPoint, we're going to look and talk about how, first of all, we have a bunch of regulations. Now, this is a ForComply screenshot in PowerPoint. Probably should have just shown you this live, but ForComply stores a bunch of regulations. And the reason we store those regulations is because we can tell from every existing geography what's happening with those regulations, and we can track it. And then you can leverage that data in terms of your actual segmentation for better niching, better targeting your different constituents. These regulations, when you apply them to an individual and to whether they have consent or not, and to whether you have legitimate interest or not, and so forth, turn into what are called permissions or permission types. And you can create permission types, and permission types can exist for digital advertising. They can exist for SMS or WhatsApp or all the different ways you can connect to somebody. And so you can very carefully regulate or respond to regulations that require you to respond to some of these regulations in some ways, but maximize your marketing capability in the other ways. So these regulations, they are very widespread. There's a bunch of laws either in place in the United States, more coming. There's talk about doing this on a national basis. There, of course, are a bunch of global laws And these laws all need to be complied with if you are a global organization. And I'm now going to switch over to For Comply and kind of shown you down here at the bottom that each of these regulations is going to be captured by For Comply. Each of the geographies that somebody responds to is also going to be captured in For Comply. And so every contact you have is we're gathering this information, whether the basis of it is legitimate interest, whether the basis of it is consent, whether the basis of it is a corporate contract. All this information is being gathered, and then you can leverage this information in 4 segments. So this is what I want to take kind of a quick run at now. If we go back to For Comply, sorry, I switched too quickly here. There's a bunch of information we're gathering from a compliance perspective, where the information came from, what geography it's from, what regulation is passed, what permission they were granted, and then a very detailed history on every single citizen. All of this information can be leveraged from a marketing perspective. A lot of companies just gather this information because they're required by law and don't realize this. When this information is combined with everything else you know about the customer, it gives you a significant advantage over not using it, not leveraging it. So I'm going to jump into 4 segments here for a second. And let's look at some of these categories of information and see and talk about what we can do with it. Let's take this first one, citizen permissions. So here under citizen permissions, we have a lot of different information that the system is gathering, and exactly how you use it is something that takes a little of experience, a little bit of effort over time, but we can look at it down here from a regulation perspective. We can expand regulation, and we can see all of the regulations and exactly how many people are under each regulation. So I can see how many people are running under the EU for GDPR. I can see we have only 643 in Australia. I can see we have 1.5 thousand running under PIPA in Brazil, 3.4 thousand, 3,400 under CCPA in California. And so all of this information can then be utilized. So let's say I want to kind of combine some of this information. I want to take the 11,000 we have in GDPR, and I want to use that information to segment against something like what business unit somebody is functioning in. Well, I can close this up. I can come up here to business unit, and I can say to myself, okay, I've got the Cloud Apps business unit, the For Comply Products business unit, the Marketing Automation Services business unit. How many people in GDPR are working with the For Comply Products business unit? I can drag this over here, and presto, I can see that, okay, we got 52,000 running For Comply Products, we got 11,000 in GDPR. And look, most of our GDPR customers, most of our GDPR users, it looks to me like about 3/4, and I can actually click on this segment and get an exact number if I want to. 8,617 are For Comply product users that we must comply with GDPR. So this gives me information. And I can now use this information in a bunch of different ways. One of the obvious ways is I can come over here and I can say, hey, you know what? I want to turn this information into a Marketo call list, or I want to turn this information into a Salesforce call list, or I want to turn this into an Eloqua static list that I can do a mass campaign to. So this ability to gather this permission data, in this case, all we've done is work with 2 elements of information, the regulation and the business unit. But we can go a lot deeper than this. We can collapse this information. We can come back and we say, well, what about expiration? What about when the permissions expire? And if we look here under permissions expire, we can see there's some that are going to expire anytime in the future. There's some that have expired. There's things we could do with that, of course, right? Probably obvious and jump out at you. Expiration in the next week, expiration in the next 2 weeks. What time frame do I want to make work in? Well, in this case, maybe I want to say, I want to work with anybody whose expiration is going to work in the next year. And I can combine this with the GDPR regulations I've already put on screen and the For Comply products, and I can get a very small niche here. I can find that there are 787 out of the 57,000 For Comply product business unit owners that are using GDPR and whose data is going to expire in the next year. Now, when you get to a small quantity like this, you're able to do what's called niche targeting or hyper segmentation or micro segmentation, a bunch of terms for it. And you can address and segment and personalize communications to groups on a far finer basis. So you can say, hey, we can see that you gave us consent a while back, but it's going to expire in the next year, or if we used one of these smaller time frames, the next 2 weeks or the next month. And we'd like to talk to you, see if you're still interested in For-Comply products and would like to renew. So what is the result of this? We're focusing in on a product with a particular regulation, with an expiration of a particular time frame, and we're able to leverage the combination of that data, in this case in a visual manner, and really turn that into something that we can then use from a marketing automation or a salesperson rep call down perspective. Now I'm going to pause here for a quick second and ask if there are any questions. If there are, please go ahead and run them over to the chat. Richard will catch it for you and rudely interrupt me, right, Richard?
That's correct. In fact, we have a question that came in earlier. And
okay.
It said, speaking about capturing consent inputs, besides the online forms, are there other sources where consent input can come from and flow into this system?
Absolutely. So I'm going to, let's see. I don't know if I can jump to the right slide. Maybe I can jump to the right slide. Let me see if I can do this on the fly. It's a great question, though. I'm going to pause and just switch back to a slide that I showed you earlier real quick. It's going to be up here in just a moment. There it is. Resuming share. So if you guys can see my screen here, you'll notice over here, we have something called the For-Comply API. Two things, actually. We have the For-Comply API, and we also, in this particular case, have a marketing integration to and through Eloqua. So in this particular hypothetical example, just as you said, we can collect consent. We can collect consent from the external forms that we have, but we could also collect it from the Eloqua forms or the Eloqua communications we have with our customer. We could put consent potentially on an email or on a landing page, and that could all route into consent. In addition, we could have over here a Salesforce system, and every time a salesperson you could establish that your salespeople or especially if you had a call center, were talking to someone, ask, is it okay if we send you something? And if they say yes, they check off a little something on a Salesforce form that comes through a web trigger. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, an API call or is a special term I'm looking for. I can't think of it at the moment. But anyway, they would trigger it automatically and flow that into consent. In addition, let's say you have an ERP system. Maybe you have NetSuite, maybe you have SAP, maybe you have Great Plains or any one of the ERP systems out there. And because someone is a customer, you can assume that they have consent because it's contractual. So you can have consent coming not just from these external forms, but from your marketing automation system, your CRM system, your ERP system. And I could actually go on and talk about e-commerce and other places that consent could flow into the system. If you have any more questions on that, or that question does not fully answer your question, feel free to throw something back in the chat and we'll pick it up again in a second. I'm going to take just a quick moment to get back to the right slide, which is here. All right, so we're switching back to PowerPoint now for a minute. And now I want to talk about rights. Now, For-Comply has a rights capability, and that rights capability means that you can get the right to be forgotten or the right to access information, the right to portability. This information can all be automated in terms of working with your digital citizens, and this then flows into your legal evidence archive, collects the information through the API, which I don't have on this screen, but then gives that to the external person. So this is how it happens from a For-Comply perspective, sort of architecturally. What it means though, and here I'm going to, again, switch. I'm going to jump over to For-Comply. Where are we? There we are. And what this means is that here from a citizen rights fulfillment perspective, we have a rights dashboard that shows what rights are being fulfilled and requested. We actually have the rights request where we can see a list of them and all the data on them. We have a bunch of rights workflows. These rights workflows show individual steps for each of these rights that someone would have to go through. All of this is data that is ultimately, again, available to you over here in the segmentation tool. So what this allows you to do is come back from a rights request perspective and see and segment on everybody that started a rights request but didn't complete it. Or maybe everybody that started a rights request, but did so in a regulatory area where they didn't need to, or in a specific regulatory area that you wanted to talk to them about. And this again enables micro-targeting. And I'm just going to switch back here to PowerPoint for a second, because a lot of companies miss the concept of hyper. You can call it a bunch of different things. You can call it hyper targeting, you can call it niching, you can call it audience granulation. Pepper and Rogers called it one-to-one marketing in the 90s. Some of you that were around back then will remember that. All of these are different ways of taking a big database and focusing in on a very small part of it. Most companies lean heavily into batch and blast. Why is this? I think it's just people are not, executives especially, just kind of assume that the more people we send it to, the better off we're going to be. When in fact, if you take that big market, you think about the different messages that you want to send to each of them, and you slice and dice it down to each individual piece, you're dramatically and better off. So we have the capability within 4 segments of doing this hyper targeting or precision marketing. Let's switch again to 4 segments this time. And just give you another example. I'm going to jump over here. I'm going to create another Venn diagram. I already used the expiration field and the regulation field. This time I'll use country. And maybe I want to work with all the people that are in, let's see, let's use Canada. I think Canada is probably a pretty good one. Let's drag Canada over. And let's go to everybody and find out. Now, an interesting information about, let's see, grab the right field here. Interesting fact about Canada is they have what's called CASL, the Canadian Anti-Spam Law. And under Canadian anti-spam law, you have something called implied consent and express consent. These are specific types of consent that are allowed and defined by certain regulations only in Canada. Well, what I can do is I can drag over these, and of course you can see that everybody with express consent is in Canada, not a coincidence because that is a Canadian thing, but we can see how many specifically are in that. And again, I can go back to system and I can say how many people that are using Marketo, or I can go to system type and say how many people that are using a CRM system. And I can segment on that even more, and I can get I can find the confluence of all 3 of those. Or what I can do is not get the confluence of all 3 of those. I can say, hey, I want to see everybody that is in Canada that has not given express consent, and choose those. And I can create, again, a ability to drag those over to Eloqua and turn those into a static list in Eloqua for targeting and fulfillment. There we go. Choose your Eloqua folder, drop it over, and so forth. So let me, Bob, I really am wrapping up sort of the presentation today. There is just a ton of things that you can segment on here. So you can seg on permission types. I can click here and I can see how those permission types break out, for example. I can see how many people allow us to communicate electronically, how many we have permission to process data, how many we can communicate via SMS. I can do that same thing for any of these particular segments and leverage that data in a brand new diagram or a brand new funnel, or maybe I want to see it across country. Let's see everybody that I can communicate electronically with and what it looks like around the world. So doing 250 queries, it's going to give me that information. Once I have that information, I can select the countries, I can turn it into a Venn diagram, and I can sub-segment and target on even a higher and higher basis. So that is pretty much our presentation today. If you have any questions, you can send information to info@forethought.marketing. Call us. You can also email me directly at mlavelle@forethoughtmarketing.com. We'd love to have you contact us. Any questions, Richard, before we wrap it up here?
Yes, we do have a question. Make sure I'm managing my mutes like I said at the beginning. So you mentioned permissions early in your presentation. Could you expand on that idea?
Sure. Basically, what we want to do from a privacy compliance perspective is take all of these different laws, of which there's a whole bunch of them, right? I mean, in fact, there's literally dozens of them now. And we want to turn those laws into something that's technically understandable. And so you as an organization in our product called ForComply can define permissions. And a permission might be something that is a legal requirement under GDPR, like permission to process. It also might be something that's more channel specific, like permission to email or permission to send something via SMS or WhatsApp, or something that's more channel specific. It might be something that is, snail mail specific. It might, there's under California law, I forget whether it's CCPA or CPRA, but one of the two California laws, you have permission to sell, and you're only allowed to ask for permission to sell once a year. So there's another permission that's called the permission to ask to sell that you get once every year. So all of these are different types of permissions. Based on the law that somebody complies with, you can turn their permissions on and off. Those permissions then exist for a limited period of time. Well, for some countries, for some laws, a limited period of time. For example, if someone downloaded a white paper on implied consent in EU but did not give you consent, you might say, okay, we have permission to email them this white paper and another couple of things for the case over the course of 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 8 weeks. Hopefully that explains permissions. If there's any more, happy to answer them. Any other questions?
That's actually all the questions we have for today. So with that, Mark, thank you very much for your presentation today. Thanks everyone who joined us.